All right, so this is a video comparing two different planar headphones. First, we have the Audeze LCD-1s, and then we have the HIFIMAN Sundaras. So these are two very, very different pairs of headphones, and I'm going to be comparing and contrasting these throughout this video so you can decide if you're thinking about one or the other, which one of the two might be a better fit for you. So a few things to think of here up front, just as a quick intro. They're both planar magnetic headphones, so if that's what you're looking for, both of these are exactly that. And both of these headphones are also under $400. So the HIFIMAN Sundaras, I think they have a retail price of $500, but they're $350 all over the place all the time, so I'm just going to consider these $350 headphones. In contrast, the Audeze LCD-1s are a little bit more expensive at $399, although they do come with a carrying case, which I'd say is worth at least $25, so it does offset that a little bit. Also, when speaking about cost, it is important to note that the Audeze headphones are made in America, whereas the HIFIMANs are made in China. So there will be a little bit of cost being transferred there. So the thing about these headphones is they're actually very, very different sounding headphones, and I think they're going to appeal to different people that have different goals in why they're buying the headphones. So I'll break that down as we go through this so you can decide which one of these two is right for you. I do think that both are great headphones, but super different, so we'll just dive into that a little bit. And also both do have their own flaws, so I will break those down as well as we go through this so you can know what to look out for when you buy these and if those flaws are ultimately deal breakers for what you're looking for. I will say both of these headphones will be linked in the description of this video if you want to go there and check them out. They'll both be affiliate links, so if you click those, they will support my channel, but if you don't want to do that, feel free to just search them on Google and you'll find them just fine. Also, while I did purchase the HIFIMAN Sundaras on my own a little under 2 years ago, Audeze did provide the LCD-1s to me in order to do this review. So a quick thank you to Audeze for doing so, but I'll do my best not to let that affect my opinion while doing this review. So first up, I'm going to talk about the HIFIMAN Sundaras. So one thing with the Sundaras is that they are primarily made out of metal. So that is something that appears to be of higher quality. If you want metal headphones, here you go. These are exactly that. And also when you wear them on your head, you're not going to notice any creaking sounds as you do that. So that is something that's annoying, and that is something that I have noticed with the LCD-1s. So because of the construction, they don't have any creaking, although they do creak a bit if you do like this when they're not on, but I only care about what they sound like when they're actually on my head. And I'll also say that HIFIMAN is known for quality control issues, and I have had my fair share of quality control issues with these headphones over about the 2 years in which I have actually owned them. So first up are the ear pads, which I had to replace. There's some hair on here, which is nice. But I had to replace these ear pads after about 6 months of use, and I have much, much nicer ear pads on there now from Dakoni. So those were like $75, although you can get replacements from HIFIMAN much cheaper. But essentially, if I remember right, the stock ones are kind of glued on, and that glue just came apart over time. So I would not expect those to last super long for you. So if you buy these particular headphones, I would expect to need to replace your ear pads at some point in the near-ish future. Also, a much bigger issue is that the right driver on these particular headphones is actually failing. So I have had to essentially just take apart the right side of the ear cup twice, and then I kind of wiggle around the wires on that driver and I push on a little bit. I put it back in there and it just happens to work. There's no reason it should work. I didn't do anything to fix it. But I think the actual construction, the way it's laminated together, where that actual driver or the speaker is laminated together, is just not done quite perfectly well. So my general expectation with headphones is if I take care of them, I expect them to last essentially forever. If I'm not being hard on them, I don't understand why they would break, especially not a $350 pair of headphones in a pretty short period of time. So that is a huge drawback with these. I will say that I contacted very, very recently, like past week, HIFIMAN to replace these, even though the warranty I believe is a year and I'm at about 2 years. And they did say if I pay to send them back, they will send me a new pair. So I will do that pretty shortly, and I do think that is a plus to HIFIMAN. In contrast, we have the Audeze LCD-1s. I always want to call these Audis instead of Audeze, but I think Audeze is correct. So these are primarily plastic as opposed to metal. So plastic doesn't mean lower quality by default. It might feel a bit lower quality, but this actually seems to be pretty high quality plastic. But there are some significant downsides here as well, as far as what I think when it comes to the overall construction. So part of a downside that I think is this is actually a plus, but these are foldable headphones. So you can fold them and then travel with them in the carrying case. They fold up nice and small. that should be a plus, and I do think that is a plus. The downside is when you wear these on your head, there is some noticeable plastic creaking as you move your head around. And when it comes to a $400 pair of headphones, I actually have an expectation that they should not under any circumstance really make creaking noises. I have a pair of $180-ish Sennheiser headphones that are also primarily plastic, and I never ever hear those creak when they're on. So my only assumption is that the overall construction with this additional folding hinge here has more places that allow these to creak, and that's probably what's causing it, although I'm not totally sure. But that is a problem in my mind, so that is a downside on the Audeze, and I also think it's probably the largest downside with these particular headphones. And as I mentioned before, the Audezes do come with a nice carrying case, so that's a really big plus. And also they come with a braided cable as opposed to the HIFIMANs, which come with a more standard cable. My cat tries to eat every cable that I own, and she doesn't try to eat braided cables for some reason, so that's always a plus to me. So I do appreciate that little bump up in quality there. Next up, I'm going to talk about comfort really quickly because comfort is ultimately super subjective. But these are very, very different headphones in terms of how they fit on your head. So the LCD-1s are actually pretty small. They're over the ear, so they go around my ears completely. But I have fairly large ears, so they don't cover my ears easily. I can actually feel the pad around the edges at all times. So that is a drawback for me personally, although if you prefer a tighter feeling headphone when it's around your ears, you would actually prefer that. Also, it doesn't have the headband that goes down on a suspension like the HIFIMAN Sundaras do. So this headband is nice and squishy. It feels really comfortable, but it's a more standard headband in comparison to the headband that comes on the Sundaras that, in my opinion, just looks and feels a little bit more high quality. Also, the ear cups on these are absolutely massive, so they easily fit over my head, and it feels like you're kind of wearing a little comfy pillow. So that is a plus to me. I do find these to be much more comfortable for my somewhat larger head. And I have aftermarket, pretty expensive ear pads on here from Tacony, like I mentioned before. So I don't remember what the stock ones felt like, but I do think they were very similar to these. I don't remember this being a drastically different improvement outside of the fact that these won't break apart pretty much ever. So I do prefer the ear pads and how large the ear cups are on these, but that is ultimately a personal preference. But my vote would go to the HIFIMANs there. And next up, before we talk about 3 different songs that I'm going to compare and contrast across these headphones, I'm going to talk about how I'm actually powering these headphones so you can get a good idea of what my setup is, because the audio setup you have will do a lot to actually influence the sound. So I have a JDS Labs EL DAC, which they don't sell anymore, but they have an EL DAC too, which is very, very similar. By no means the most expensive DAC that you can buy, but it's a pretty decent one. And I'm also using a drop THX AAA 789 amp. So that's a very high quality amp. Once again, you can buy more expensive, better amps now, like the A90 from Topping, which will outperform the THX AAA 789. But all things considered, this is a pretty decent setup, and it shouldn't have any drastic negative influence on the sound, and also shouldn't color the sound too much. So what I hear should be what most people would hear on a fairly transparent system as well. And beyond that, I'm just streaming all these songs through Spotify on high quality. So not the highest quality audio that's available, but I'm assuming that's what the vast, vast majority of people will be doing when they're actually listening to songs. So now I'm going to talk about 3 different songs somewhat quickly here to compare and contrast the LCD-1s against the Sundaras. And the first one is a song by Childish Gambino called 3005. I did that because this song has pretty heavy bass, and planars are well known for their bass, so I did want a song that would really emphasize that. So first up, we're talking about the Sundaras, and they have very, very solid bass. It's not overwhelming, and I actually wish it was a little bit heavier than it is, although I tend to prefer more of a V shape with heavier bass and a little bit more treble than a typical flat headphone. These are more on the flat side, but that being said, they do have really nice, strong, and very, very clean bass. So I don't think most people will be disappointed. I'm certainly not disappointed myself. I do think that these are absolutely excellent. And I did think the Sundaras bass did sound a little bit tighter and crisper than the bass on the LCD-1s. And a quick difference about the LCD-1s compared to the Sundaras across basically all of these songs. The LCD-1s are going to bring the mids much more forward. So in this case, the vocals on this song by Childish Gambino were much closer to me, which made the bass seem less apparent, even though I don't think it actually was. The bass wasn't substantially different, although I did think the Sundara's bass was a little bit tighter. But because the vocals were so much closer to me, it did feel like there was less bass in the song. Also, the Sundaras did have less intense highs than the LCD-1s did. So the highs are much more apparent when it comes to the LCD-1s. They feel also more forward or closer to you. For example, there are some snare, I think it's called cross stick sounds in the song, where it sounds like they're hitting the drumstick on the edge or the rim of the snare. That sounded much, much more apparent and much, much closer to me when I was listening to the LCD-1s. And also, it did seem like the vocals were a little bit more clear on the Sundaras. And I don't think that was a technical limitation on either headphone, not so on the LCD-1s, for example. I just think the LCD-1s are much more analytical headphones. So because it basically does a more accurate representation, or it seems to be a slightly more accurate representation of the actual recording, you might also notice some faults in the recordings that you won't notice on the HIFIMAN Sundaras. So I think that's what was going on here. I don't think it was a matter of actual clarity in terms of the technical capability of the headphone. I just think the LCD-1s are a little bit more accurate, and in this case, that was a downside for me. And across this entire song, but especially starting about 110 in and also 245 in to this particular song, the Sundaras have a much, much wider soundstage. And if you're not familiar with soundstage, I like to think of it as how big is the room that you're listening to the music in. So the LCD-1s, it's like you're in a much smaller, more intimate room, and the Sundaras, you're in a much bigger, more expansive room. This is absolutely personal preference in terms of what you want out of your headphones. Do you want a much closer, tighter, more intimate sound, or to feel kind of lost in a large room where the music is fully surrounding you? So if you're into the music surrounding you, being kind of lost in this big musical zone, then the Sundaras are going to be much better on basically every song. And in contrast, if you want tighter sounds that are closer to you, where you feel like more right next to the music, right next to the speakers, the LCD-1s are going to give you that. So that's it for this song. And next up, we're going to check out Deadmau5, bridged by a Lightwave. I like listening to Deadmau5 because all of this electronic music is analog, so it has a cool sound and the production is absolutely fantastic. So a big difference here, once again, is that the Sundaras are much, much more expansive. So it's really easy to get lost in this song with how wide the sound is. I thought it was a pretty amazing representation of this particular music. And for example, there are sections where you have synth keyboards, and those synth keyboards sound so much closer to you through the LCD-1s than they do with the HIFIMAN Sundaras. So it does, once again, sound like this song was actually mixed differently. It is that dramatic of a difference. So if you want all these elements very close to you, LCD-1's way to go. If you want them wide, expansive, kind of getting lost in this musical zone, the Sundaras are going to do that much better. At least they did that much better for me. And another difference here is that the vocals in the Sundaras sound much, much further back than they do the LCD-1s. The LCD-1s bring those so close to you in comparison. And I think that's because the LCD-1s are marketed as mixing headphones for audio engineers. At least that seems to be what their website really focuses on. So it's my assumption with the LCD-1s that because they are a mixing and mastering focused pair of headphones, that they purposely bring those sounds closer to you so that you can hear the differences between all the different instruments a little bit more easily. With something like the Sundaras that pushes those sounds further back, it would probably be harder to really understand if there was an issue with any of those particular recordings in comparison to the LCD-1s. So something else in this particular song, about 2:22 in, there's some really cool sounding synth that with the Sundaras has really great energetic kind of crunchy sound to it. And I will say with the Sundaras, the more power you throw at these headphones, the better they're going to sound. These are marketed as being a mobile device friendly pair of headphones, but I would say don't trust that at all. I mean, you can certainly power these with a mobile phone if that's what you want to do, but you're going to get nowhere near the sound quality as you will with a good DAC and especially a very powerful, clean amp. So that's a big, big deal on the Sundaras. In contrast, the LCD-1s are much, much easier to drive. So driving is essentially how much power does it take to make these sound good. I found that when I had the Sundaras on and I just cable swapped with the LCD-1s by Audeze, that I had to crank the volume down a whole lot to basically not have it be way too loud for me to listen to. So the LCD-1s, much easier to drive. They should actually be easier to listen to on a mobile phone if that's what you want to do. And also the LCD-1s didn't seem to benefit from throwing a lot more power at them in quite the same way those Sundaras did. So they should be a much more friendly pair of headphones if you don't have a really strong amp to drive these. And a couple quick more things on the synth sounds at about 222. So the LCD-1s did have a more crunchy sound, for lack of a more articulate description. And I think that's because they're bringing some more mids and highs into those sounds than the Sundaras did. The Sundaras seemed to stay a little bit lower, where the LCD-1s brought some more tones in there that gave it a very different vibe. I'll also say about 2:30 into this song, there is some pretty decent bass. So it does hit or appear to hit a little bit harder in the LCD-1s than it does in the Sundaras. I think the bass has a little bit more depth on the Sundaras, but it also sounds much more further back. It's pushed back more in comparison. So I think that's why it appeared to be more apparent and strong on the LCD-1s, but worth calling out on this particular song. And the last song that I have is The Chain, at least a 2004 remaster of the song The Chain by Fleetwood Mac. So a very different song than the other two that I listened to here. So first up, I'll say in the Sundaras, the separation of sounds was absolutely fantastic, and I really enjoyed that. But this is actually the first song that I personally enjoyed the LCD-1 sound signature over that of the Sundara. And the reason for that is that it brings the vocals and guitars so much closer forward, so it feels like you're right next to the band as they're playing, as opposed to being further back in a room where it's kind of just surrounding you around. So I really think if you're a big classic rock fan, the LCD-1s might be a better match for you than the Sundaras if you're looking for a more intense vibe, if you're looking for a more close listening experience to the actual vocals and guitars, as opposed to the Sundaras that are going to throw you further back, like I mentioned before. I will say the preference between these two headphones obviously is going to be personal opinion and what you want. So let's say I'm going to listen to this particular song all day on repeat because I want to punish myself for whatever reason. I would prefer in that case to listen to it on the Sundaras because the sound is much more chill. It's much more relaxed, which just makes it easier to listen to any music, quite frankly, throughout the entire day. I don't want music that's really, really energetic and intense if I'm going to be listening for 7 or 8 hours while I work. In contrast, if I'm listening to the song a few times, I'm going to prefer the LCD-1s because I think it's a more accurate representation of how this song was meant to be heard when it was recorded. I can hear the individual instruments much better. So ultimately personal preference, but I do lean LCD-1s here. So when it comes to a conclusion of picking these two different headphones, obviously these are two dramatically different headphones in terms of the sound signature that you're going to get. So the Sundaras are generally much more chill or laid back. It's a very relaxing listening experience pretty much through any song. And also do keep in mind when you're listening on Sundaras, the more power you throw at them, the better they're going to sound. So I do recommend a pretty strong audio setup if you want to get the most out of these. You obviously don't need a crazy powerful amp just to listen to them, but I do think you would be underwhelmed if you lacked that. In contrast, the LCD-1s are going to be easier to drive, so you can throw less power at them and they're going to sound better, at least in comparison to how good they could possibly sound than the Sundaras will. And also they do have a smaller soundstage, so it will make it sound like the sounds are closer to you, like you're more in the music right around you in the immediate area, in comparison to the Sundaras where it's like you're in a big expansive room. Total personal preference. My personal preference is for a big soundstage. I like very immense and overall expansive music. But if you prefer a more intimate, tighter listening experience, the LCD-1s might be your personal pick. And a couple more quick call outs that I do think are worth calling out. So the LCD-1s are designed to be mixing and mastering headphones, at least that's what their website shows. And I do think if I am doing that kind of work, I would easily prefer those over the Sundaras. For example, when I even edit and record videos, I have used the LCD-1s to pick up on nuances that I could not hear on my Sundaras. So when used for that purpose, a pretty easy pick here for the LCD-1s. I think you'll hear the sounds better and also notice imperfections a bit more easily so you can properly deal with those. Also, if you're big into gaming, I would also prefer the LCD-1s because I think you'll hear things like footsteps much closer or easier if you're doing something like playing a competitive first-person shooter game. If you're just looking for an expansive, chill, relaxing, sort of experience the world kind of game, I think the Sundaras are more than perfect for that, and I use those while gaming all the time. I've never been disappointed, but I do think it's important to call out that the LCD-1s will be more articulate when trying to bring out certain sounds like footsteps or movement, that kind of stuff. So overall, dramatically different headphones, dramatically different sounds. The biggest drawbacks, in my opinion, when it comes to the LCD-1s is the fact that they make creaking noises a little bit on your head. I don't think that's cool on a $400 pair of headphones. Not the biggest deal, but probably the biggest detractor that I have on these particular headphones. I do think they should hold up better over time than the HIFIMANs because as I called out, I've owned my HIFIMAN Sundaras for under 2 years. I've had to replace the ear pads. I've also had the right driver start to fail. So neither of those are good things. HIFIMAN is known for quality control issues. That is not the case for Audeze, at least to the best of my knowledge. So if I were to, for example, pick both of these up, drop them on the ground, I would assume the Audezes would survive far more likely than that of the HIFIMAN, which I would honestly expect to break, even though the Audezes are made out of plastic and the HIFIMAN is made out of metal. But that is really it for this video. I do hope this was a helpful breakdown and comparison to you, and if it was, feel free to hit the thumbs up button. Also, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the comment section. I'll do my best to help you if I can, but if I can't, maybe someone else will be able to. And if you want to see more videos like this, please consider subscribing. I will do my best to keep creating new content just like this. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching.